show, including want to take a live look. We know Governor Pritzker will join medical professionals. This is for a panel addressing recent medical misinformation from the Trump administration. This is taking place at the University of Illinois, Chicago, their College of Medicine there. As soon as that happens, we will bring it to you live. But first, we want to talk about something that really impacts every single American out there, and that is this government shutdown. It just didn't happen. The deal was not made. And so to talk about this with us is U.S. Congressman Sean Casten from the 6th Congressional District right here in Illinois. Congressman Casten, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule. I know you don't have a lot of it, but to speak with us about this.
Thanks for having me on.
Let's start out with this. What does it really mean when we say government shutdown for every American out there? Are there any particular offices, agencies that we may not have access to while this is going on?
Well, so this shutdown is going to be more painful than most because we haven't gotten any of the appropriations bills done. Sometimes when you have these shutdowns, it's just a few agencies. It's also going to be more painful than most because the Trump administration has been cutting staff at so many agencies over the start of their terms. In the short term, most federal employees are told that you have to show up at work, but you won't be getting paid. That lasts for a little while, although that obviously gets painful. So for people like TSA employees who don't make a lot of money to begin with, that starts creating stresses on the system. You also then have a whole set of other employees who are told that you are non-essential and so don't show up at all. Among the ones that are deemed non-essential are people like in the Environmental Protection Agency who do disaster preparedness. So we're in a really bad situation if a major hurricane hits during a shutdown, if there's something else like the East Palestine crash. Layered on top of that is that the flood insurance program is no longer authorized. So if you get a hurricane and your house floods, that's a problem, and FEMA is just about out of money. Doesn't have to happen this way. It happened because the Republicans who control all chambers couldn't manage to fund the government. But hopefully we'll get through this quickly.
I'm looking at your statement that you put out saying that this week you were going to be in D.C. ready to vote for a government funding package that improves the health, safety, and economic well-being of the American people. And these are your words here. If Congress does not act swiftly, the government will shut down. We're here. Healthcare premiums may skyrocket and millions of Americans could lose their health insurance altogether. Can you talk about that part of it? Healthcare premiums and also millions of Americans losing their health insurance. Are we there yet?
Well, so the bill that the Republicans passed, the big ugly bill earlier this year, stripped 11, 12 million people's health insurance away because of the cuts in Medicaid and the required cuts that come to Medicare as well because of the deficit ballooning parts of that bill. In addition to that, that bill did not address the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, if you will, and the tax credits that expire at the end of this year. However, if you are the beneficiary of those tax credits, your insurance company is required to notify you on October 1st, that's right now, that the subsidies will no longer be in place. So, just in the 6th district that I represent, there's about 20,000 people who depend on those tax credits, which means that their insurance costs, some of the anecdotes we've heard are people who are, going to expect to see their insurance costs double perhaps. And of course, for some people, if you can't afford the doubling, that means you just don't get insurance anymore. So the overall estimate of this is that probably something like 14 million Americans lose their health insurance because of the combination of the cuts that were already made in the big ugly bill, and then those that will come into effect unless we deal with the ACA tax credits in this bill, which is what we were asking for, what the Senate was asking for as a condition of passing this CR. And ultimately, we were told to pound sand, and so the Senate didn't get it passed, and so now we wait.
And right now is when all of the finger pointing is happening. Republicans saying, oh no, this is the Democrats' fault. And then we're hearing Democrats say the same thing. What's the issue here? Why is it that no agreement could be reached on this deal? What were some of the sticking points that you saw being problematic moving forward in terms of getting this done?
Well, so for context, I'm going into my 4th term in Congress now. 2 of those terms, the Democrats have been in the majority. 2 of those terms, the Republicans have been in the majority in the House. In the 2 terms, the Democrats were in the majority. We passed all the appropriations. We didn't get into having to do shutdowns because we did our job in knowing that there was a September 30th fiscal year, and we did that on a bipartisan basis because that was where the votes were. in the 2 terms that the Republicans have been in the majority, they have never passed a full appropriations package. And so all we ever do is go through these continuing resolutions. This particular continuing resolution, because it locked in all of the cuts that were done on a straight party line basis earlier this year, rather than going back to the last bipartisan agreement we had, it put us in a position of saying, are we going to vote to strip people's health care away? Are we going to vote to on the assumption that maybe they'll put it back in and we should trust them in spite of the fact that the White House has refused to spend congressionally mandated spending and Mike Johnson and John Thune have refused to do any oversight. And that lack of trust, that lack of a commitment by both parties of Congress just to defend the prerogatives of Congress, our constitutional authority to control spending, has made this more high stakes than it could have been. And of course, was compounded by the fact that prior to this point, the Republicans had not managed to pass any appropriations bills. They control all 3 branches. If they'd passed some of those appropriations bills, the shutdown wouldn't have covered all of government, but that's because they couldn't get their work done.
I know you mentioned Speaker Johnson there, and in fact, in your statement, you mentioned him as well, saying that he canceled previously scheduled votes for this week, sending Congress into a prolonged recess at a critical moment. Where are we now with this? When will another vote come up again?
Well, it's worth just mentioning quickly about Speaker Johnson. Remember how he got his job. The last time we had a bipartisan continuing resolution, that was when Kevin McCarthy was the speaker, and the result of that was that he got thrown out of work because his far right flank revolted. So Mike Johnson only has his job because the Republican Congress passed a bipartisan continuing resolution. So he's basically decided not to do this. Um, the That's a choice for his part, but I think essentially you have to understand that he serves at the pleasure of Donald Trump. He's not independent. As we go forward from this point, the question of how we get out of this, we'll see. The Senate Leader Thune continues to bring the vote back up. I think he's brought it up now twice in a row. So far, it hasn't changed any of the votes. If they were to pass something out of the Senate, we would, of course, be right back on a plane because we'd have to pass it in the House. And depending on what would pass out of the Senate, we'll see where the votes are in the House for that. As of right now, though, Leader Thune does not seem to be inclined to negotiate across the aisle. They just keep bringing forward the same bill that had failed and hoping that maybe pressure will push something forward. I hope there's a better way through this. I hope it doesn't take some horrible disaster to get through. But I think that, the true nightmare scenario is we have something like the East Palestine train crash when folks in FEMA are not at work, when folks at the EPA are not at work, when folks at OSHA are not at work, and those crises become much worse than they would otherwise have been. I hope it doesn't take that to bring us back. I hope saner heads prevail before then, but right now the ball is really in the Republicans' court.
When you talk about a disaster happening, if that did happen under these circumstances, something like that was to actually happen, what would that look like because the government is shut down?
Really bad. The National Flood Insurance Program authorization expired on September 30th, yesterday. So if there was if Hurricane Helene, that came through the Carolinas and devastated all those properties less than a year ago, if that were to come next week, there is no flood insurance. The emergency funding at FEMA is essentially gone. So the resources that FEMA would have to come in and help isn't there. We need those resources. The personnel problems in many ways are bigger, though, because if you've got federal employees who are not getting paid and told that they don't need to be at work, well, that means that they can't come as quickly as you might. And when maybe you can find some way to remobilize them, how do you know that some of them didn't go and find another job because they had to pay rent? So the longer these things go on, the more difficult it becomes. If you shift away from disasters just to see some of the long-term threats, our air traffic controllers are all essential employees. They all go to work. The training program for air traffic controllers is deemed non-essential. Our air traffic controllers, the average age is pretty high. We need to bring that pipeline in. So if we don't get this done, all of a sudden we've got a huge shortage of the talent and the training we need to keep our skies safe. So there's big consequences to shutting this down. I don't know how many times I say this. We shouldn't have done this, but this is where we've ended up.
Congressman Caston, I know that you're still working for the people. You have a lot of work to do. So I will ask you this final question before we let you go. For everyday Americans, everyday people that are experiencing this shutdown, what will that look like for them?
Well, number one, everybody's circumstances are unique. Obviously, I can only directly help folks in my district, but if you've got questions, do go to our website, caston.house.gov/shutdown 2025. We've got a list of frequently asked questions there, and we're trying to just take all the questions we get from constituents, maintain some answers there so we can go through. Um, Generally speaking, the services you expect will continue, but the back office isn't there. So, for example, the Social Security office is still open, but people who are going through to process that you had an overpayment and you need a refund due, you've lost your Medicare card. Those people are not working right now, so there's some limitations that are there. The uh, you know civil courts are no longer functioning. So if you've got some problem with the government or with an agency that you want recourse, you're going to have to wait to get that recourse. Those seem like small things unless it's something that really matters to you in the immediacy of the moment. But do call us, call your member of Congress, whoever they are, because all of us are pretty good at navigating those agencies and constituent services. But be a little patient with our federal workers right now. They're good people. They got into this line of work for public service, and they're pretty well starved for resources. And I just ask you, don't also starve them for respect. They deserve a lot of our respect and love for the difficult situations we're asking them to work in right now.
Definitely in a difficult situation. U.S. Congressman Sean Casten of the 6th District of Illinois, thank you so much for your time and really talking through this issue with me. We really appreciate it for all of our viewers.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. We'll stay with Chicago Live. Again, we are awaiting a press conference to start where Governor Pritzker will join medical professionals for a panel really addressing recent medical misinformation coming from the Trump administration. This is going to happen at UIC. We have a camera in the room, and as soon as it gets started, we will bring it to you live right here. Stay with us. We have a break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Chicago Live. You are looking at Governor J.B. Pritzker at UIC right now, a part of a panel addressing recent medical misinformation from the Trump administration. We want to listen in as the governor is now at the podium. Let's take a listen.
You can ask doctors who work for the Department of Public Health by going online and visiting dph.illinois.gov. We can keep each other safe and keep each other healthy and informed. But we can't do that unless we ask questions and get information from people who've been trained their whole lives to protect and heal us. So this is my most important message of today. Once again, ask your doctor. I want all of you to have the facts, and that's why I thought it would be important to ask real questions to real doctors today who are real medical experts. You don't have to listen to everything that they say, you don't have to agree with everything they say, but they do know what they're talking about. So today we're joined by three of the most renowned medical doctors, not just in the state of Illinois, but in the country. You know, we were very fortunate through COVID-19 to not have to rely on doctors from other places because we already have world-class medical experts and leaders in the state of Illinois. And once again, we have world-class medical experts that are here to help us answer a few questions. Let me start with Dr. Emily Landon, Associate Professor of Medicine and Executive Medical Director of Infection Prevention and Control at UChicago Medicine. Raise your hand. Just, yeah, there you go. Emily Landon. Next to her is Dr. Lin Yi, a maternal fetal medicine physician and the Vice Chair of Health Policy and Advocacy Committee for the Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine. Thank you for joining us. And next to me, I hate to say my favorite doctor because I chose him to be the director of the Illinois Department of Public Health, and he's doing just an outstanding job. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Loeb. So I want to start with a quick lightning round of questions for them collectively to help us answer, hoping for just a yes or no answer to each, and then we'll hear a little bit of detail after that, because I want to just cut through the noise so everybody can see the answers and hear the answers easily, directly. So we're going to start with, are vaccines considered safe and healthy and effective? What do you know? Okay, another tough one. Are you ready? Should I consider vaccinating my family against preventable diseases after a conversation with my doctor? So I want to stop because we have a few other questions, but I want to just stop for a moment and ask Dr. Landon, who I just want to side note point out that during the pandemic was such an enormous help to the people of Illinois. At one of our very earliest press conferences, she stood up and, you know, in a very tough moment when the President of the United States was saying something completely different, she was willing to stand up and just remind everybody how important it is to stay safe. Dr. Landon, who I just want to side note point out that during the pandemic was such an enormous help to the people of Illinois. At one of our very earliest press conferences, she stood up and, you know, in a very tough moment when the President of the United States was saying something completely different, she was willing to stand up and just remind everybody how important it is to stay safe, to listen to doctors, to do the right thing, and whatever's good for you and your family. And so I really appreciate her. So Dr. Landon, would you mind saying a few words about vaccinations and, you know, how families ought to operate in the world of all the disinformation?
Yeah, this is such a mystery to me, but I can see why. It may feel easy to think that there's not a downside to skipping a vaccine, especially when they've been so effective that we don't see things every day like measles. Most people have never seen hepatitis B or don't know anyone that's had meningitis. Most people don't even know someone who's had a serious case of influenza or COVID. But as healthcare providers, healthcare workers, and doctors, we see what you don't. Babies in the hospital who struggle with RSV, adults with chronic liver disease who contracted hepatitis B as an infant, patients struggling to breathe in the ICU because they have a serious complication of COVID or influenza, women, young women with cervical cancer. all of these are preventable with vaccines. Just like you buy home insurance, you have smoke detectors, and you wear seatbelts, vaccines help protect you and your family against high risk, but low likelihood problems. Skipping them because you think it can't happen to you is a mistake. Now, I know some people worry about side effects, and so do I. All medicines, including vaccines, have them. But every medicine, including vaccines, undergo really rigorous safety testing. Those words, safe and effective, aren't just words to us. They are a medical sort of shorthand for an incredibly rigorous process by which drug manufacturers and researchers prove to other clinicians and experts at the FDA and other healthcare workers that medicines and vaccines are able to provide the benefit they claim to everyone or almost everyone who receives them with no excess side effects or no undue out-of-proportion side effects. And because we give vaccines to healthy people to prevent something, not necessarily like medicines where we give it to a sick person to fix something, the bar is even higher for what's considered safe and effective. Those trials require thousands of people just like us to volunteer to receive experimental medicines or vaccines, and then be tracked, followed, poked, and prodded for an extended period of time afterwards to collect the data that we then use, and is submitted to journals and published widely so that people like us can pick over it and look through it and critique it and figure out if we really believe that these things work. The vast majority of new drug applications, including vaccines to the FDA, never make it to safe and effective. So when we say that we think that medications and vaccines are safe and effective, that means something to us. It's not just words. I know it's hard as a human when something bad does happen. We always want to blame something. Anything. Your mom has a child is diagnosed with autism. You sort of scour your memory, think about what might have been different in the weeks or days leading up to that diagnosis. And it can maybe soothe your mind a little bit to think that maybe it's that new medicine or that vaccine. But as healthcare providers, we know that's an incredibly slippery slope. Because if we put too much into a few rare events, we might keep other people from receiving potentially life-saving treatments and therapies and vaccines. We have to trust in the science of epidemiology, which is not a word that most people knew before the pandemic, but it's a way of using math and science to help us figure out whether or not things that happen are more likely to happen after someone's received a vaccine, or if it's the same or less likely as someone who didn't receive that vaccine. Now, you may not realize this, but you depend on the science of epidemiology every day. It's what's brought clean, safe drinking water to the tap in your kitchen. It's how we have car seats and seatbelts in our cars. It's how we have sewer systems and waste management. It's why you have worry-free, non-raw milk for your cereal. It's why you have folate supplements in pregnancy to prevent neural tube defects, cancer chemotherapy, and a host of other medical innovations that have made our modern life and our lifespan possible, including vaccines. You don't have to understand the nuance of the math, that's for us. And we'll explain it to you if you ask. But I urge you to trust that science for vaccines as much as you trust it for everything else. If you worry about your own personal need and a concern about a health concern you have or a side effect of a vaccine, talk to your doctor. We can help you walk through that. Don't rely on scary stories, and be careful who you trust. Sometimes it might seem like medical professionals who give speeches at press conferences are really just parroting talking points, but we are ultimately just like you. We worry about whether we're doing right by our kids, whether we're doing the right thing for our aging parents. Some of us struggle with chronic health problems. We've taken care of family members who face really serious illnesses too. And we know how hard it is to make a decision to take a medicine or do something that seems foreign and weird to you. But as healthcare workers, we also get get to see, yes, the tragedies, but also the successes. The people who don't grow up with hepatitis B, the kids who don't have this. And that's why every single one of us up here is going to make time to roll up our sleeves and get our COVID and influenza vaccines this year and every single year, even if we're going to be a little tired and sore afterwards. And we strongly recommend that you do it.
Okay, we're briefly going to go back to the signs and simple answers. So, again, a lightning round question. Should pregnant women tough it out instead of taking medications their doctors recommend? Okay, seems unanimous. Dr. Yee, would you mind lending your expertise to this? Because I know this.
Again, we are joining Governor J.B. Pritzker right now with other medical professionals. This is for a panel. They're addressing disinformation, medical disinformation, a lot of it coming from the Trump administration. They're also talking about vaccines, saying that they work. You heard that from a doctor there. And right now we are going to take a break. But again, when we come back, we will listen in on this conversation. Again, this is happening at UIC at the College of Medicine. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Chicago Live. Right now, we are watching in on Governor J.B. Pritzker, joined by other medical professionals at UIC's College of Medicine, talking about disinformation in the medical world. We've already heard from the governor, we've heard from a doctor, and we're also, we were just listening in and we could hear from a doctor in the OBGYN department there at UI Health. We're going to listen in as the governor is speaking yet again on this issue of misinformation, medical misinformation in this age. Let's listen in right now.
Them are insulting at best, and it's bad policy, it's bigoted, and I want to emphasize how important it is to, this is one of many things that need to be countered in the misinformation, disinformation world of this current federal administration. So it's my pleasure to ask Dr. Vore if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about the response that we need to be having to this and about autism in general.
Well, thanks so much, Governor. And, you know, I do have that great honor of serving the state as the director of the Illinois Department of Public Health. But I do want to talk about my experiences before I traded the white coat for the suit coat to be in the administration. The time when I was a practicing pediatrician, both on the south side of Chicago and on the east side of Springfield. Often being a pediatrician, you have a job where you have moments where you are filled with the highest of highs, but sometimes often the lowest of lows. And it is a great privilege to be a witness to those moments in people's lives, helping shepherd families through some of the most complicated, troubling, exciting, bewildering days of their lives. And that requires earning the trust of your patients, being out there in moments to be credible, transparent, reliable, dependable. And that may mean that you might not know the exact answer to a question at the moment, but your honesty and your credibility allows you to build special and meaningful relationships. Now, I was incredibly fortunate as a general pediatrician, and I've been fortunate as the IDPH director, as a human being, to have and be around people and individuals in the autistic community. Autistic people are such valued members of our Illinois community. I have seen the great joy and impact that they bring to their families, to their friends, to their communities, the amount of joy when they create certain moments, special moments that we can all take part in, just like any valued citizen and resident here in Illinois. And I think that's what is so hurtful, despicable of the things that are coming out of the federal government, troubling to put individuals with strengths and skills in a different category that is not part of all of us, Illinois residents. We know that autistic individuals are diverse and unique. We know that there is no single cause of autism, and many factors influence its characteristics. And we know, importantly, that early identification and connection to resources are critical to the success of autistic people. And we are hearing those talking points coming from the federal government that we're in the midst of an epidemic. But instead, the truth is that the increased identification of autism is a story. And it's a story about how doctors and scientists are learning so much. And those things, those learnings, are making sense of traits that for so long were so difficult to identify and bring together. Kind of like when you look at the stars with your naked eyes, you see hundreds. But with a telescope, you can see thousands. And the latest technology and research has allowed our ability to make sense of things that previously we couldn't make sense to. Now, as the governor said, we have rigorous studies, and as Dr. Landon and Yee mentioned, and we know, and those rigorous studies have told us, that neither vaccines nor acetaminophen are the cause of autism. That is the detailed studies and the rigorous analysis that we have all reviewed to be able to say that plainly, and say that based on the credibility and the transparency that I bring to this job as IDPH director in the same way that I brought to the job as a general pediatrician. What the medical community has done, though, is developed reliable early detection methods. allowing more autistic individuals and their families with the expanded special education and improved behavioral and medical therapies that we know help. Now, it can be confusing. And I think part of the message that all of us want to bring is that we want you to bring to your doctors and your healthcare providers the questions that you have. We all have questions. And we all have those worries, even as trained medical professionals, on what is right. We know that science isn't static. It changes. But before we bring to you our advice, we are going to make sure that it is based on the full weight of what scientific rigor demands. Not picking and choosing the things that meet a particular agenda. Our agenda as doctors, our agenda in the Illinois Department of Public Health under Governor Pritzker's leadership is to ensure that we're bringing you the honest truth about what the science says now, uplifting that weight so that we can be reliable, dependable, credible, and transparent to the recommendations that we make. So ask those questions, get that information, and you know you'll get the right information when people are honest and direct with what they're trying to say. Our goal continues to be making sure that we make meaningful lives with social supports for everybody in Illinois, our autistic individuals and families most definitely as well. So thank you, Governor. Thanks for giving us the opportunity to talk about these important things, conversations that not every state health director gets to have with their governor, and be around such dedicated, important physicians who spend every day trying to make sure that their patients lead healthier and happier lives.
Well done. I have one last lightning round question. If I have questions about vaccinations or medications, should I ask my doctor? So, look, there is much more to say on this topic, but I thought it would be important for us to just have a straightforward, informed conversation and allow some experts to give advice. Again, families, individuals will make their own decisions, but it's important to have solid, scientifically backed advice from people who are truly knowledgeable to at least, throw into the mix of all the things that are being thrown at you, and also to put some real value on over things like social media, where you'll see all kinds of people pushing things that are just very untrue. So I want to thank all of you for joining us today. Very much appreciate your being part of this audience. I also want to thank our panelists today for their work, for their honest answers. Let's give Dr. Landon, Dr. Lee, and Dr. Vora a big round of applause. So if the audience will give us just a couple minutes, we're going to let the members of the media ask a few questions of the entire panel. I am not the expert here, but I will try to answer anything you think I should be the expert on. Yes, Rose. Yeah, there are vital services that will get covered nonetheless, but the issue with the shutdown, as you know, is that the agencies don't get reimbursed for the services that they provide. So if the shutdown goes on for some period of time, that's where you'll see the problem. We also have, as you know, 45,000 people, you may know, 45,000 people in the state of Illinois who are being furloughed as a result of that shutdown. And then I'll just take it up 10,000 feet to remind everybody that why this shutdown is taking place. The President of the United States decided to shut down the government because he's unwilling to sit down with Democrats to discuss things, and he thinks that the right thing to do is simply to fold his arms and let people go without pay to get furloughed and let all the services that people rely upon shut down. I think that's wrong, and I think that instead, because you need Democratic votes to get something done here, that he should simply sit down with the leaders and actually hash out a deal. He wrote a book, or supposedly wrote a book, called The Art of the Deal, and says he's a great deal maker. Time to go to work. Yeah. So, unfortunately, the president is likely to keep the militarization going. He can do that because there are emergency personnel and military personnel that he can keep on the job. He is likely to do that while people who deserve to get their Social Security checks and Medicaid and SNAP, and we can go on, while they go without. And instead, the militarization will go on, while innocent and vulnerable people will suffer. Yes? Yeah. You know, this is an old methodology that's been around for a long time. It has worked in many circumstances. I understand the frustration of the leaders of the labor movement about the fact that Republicans across the country have been unwilling to actually cut deals that make sense with labor, and therefore they want action on their behalf. So I understand the perspective. I have to say we've seen the process work reasonably well in the state of Illinois before, but it's their prerogative to choose not to be part of that process. Yes, hi, Olivia.
Any update on the possible military incursion in Chicago? I know you talked to federal sources of the federal government. Who at this point?
I feel so badly. You've asked this question now 3 days in a row, and there really are no new updates. They are not communicating. This is the problem. If the federal government would simply discuss things with local law enforcement, with state law enforcement, with the governor of the state, we would be able to inform the public about what's happening. We still don't know any more than there was a memo that went from the Department of Homeland Security to the Department of War, and that memo was communicated to our National Guard, but not as an order for National Guard to go deploy 100 of our National Guard, but rather as just notice. And the rest of the process has not been fulfilled yet.
Governor,
yes.
Questions. One for me, one for my colleague who couldn't make it. President Trump, as you well know, has repeatedly called Chicago an unsafe city. And hotel occupancy numbers just released pretty much in Chicago says the city set record numbers for tourism. What concerns do you have that our federal agents that are already here and the potential for National Guard could have on Chicago's reputation and tourism as well as summer?
Yeah. I mean, I'll just remind everybody in this room and anybody listening, Chicago is the greatest city in this country. I should add the greatest, biggest, big city, because we have a lot of great cities around the state of Illinois. But I think it's important to recognize, for the public to recognize, that I think we've all seen and felt that while crime is an issue, and it always is an issue in a large city, and it has been in Chicago in previous years, it is coming down. it's better than it was. Is it where we want it to be? No, it's never going to be where we want it to be. We need to end up with 0 homicides. We need to end up with 0 violent crimes. And so we always want more help to do that. But what a beautiful, great city we are in. And when the President of the United States falsely claims that Chicago is crime-ridden, it is not crime-ridden. We are not in the top 25 or 30 cities in the country, big cities in the country, for violent crime. I mean, if he wants to focus resources somewhere, how about focusing on cities in Florida, which are in the top 10 in violent crime, and he happens to be from Florida now, so perhaps he could help his own home state. But he is mischaracterizing Chicago. He clearly doesn't know anything about Chicago. He's unwilling to read anything about Chicago because the statistics are there. I know some people don't believe in statistics. Maybe they're the same people who are spreading disinformation about vaccinations. But I can say this, that if he visited Chicago, what he would see is, I think, what many of us see: a vibrant big city, a great place for tourists to come, a city that has a city of big shoulders, of workers who are going to work every day and going home every day. And we have challenges, but we are always working and actually always doing better now at overcoming those challenges.
And a question from my colleague Rob Hughes. Obviously, you're aware of the Bears economic report that came out yesterday suggesting that it's going to require $855 million in public funds for the infrastructure in and around there. Would you support any of that, given the fact that this project is anchored by privately funded Bears stadium, but also would include housing, office, hotel, retail space, etc. as part of the plan?
What I can say is I haven't evaluated all the details of that plan, but I can say this. I'm a believer in helping businesses come to Illinois, grow in Illinois. I want new, buildings and construction to occur all over the state, and I will help promote that in any way I can. I think I've been a very pro-business governor, trying to get incentives in place for businesses, making sure that we're training people for the jobs that are available. So I want them to build a stadium where they can and decide to build a stadium. In terms of the amount of money that the state would put into infrastructure, again, we do that for businesses all over the state. I can name you lots that have recently, over the last 2 years, for example, come to the state of Illinois, where, we build roads out in front of the factory or the headquarters. We build sewers. We help bring in a substation. Whatever it is that's required for infrastructure, but it's not an unending expenditure that we will put in, and I haven't looked at the numbers or how much of that would come from local government, from county government, from state government, but we work with businesses all the time, and I think that a wealthy and successful business, even if the team is not as successful as I would like them to be, although more successful recently than in the first couple of games. But it's a successful business. It's a very successful family, a billionaire family. And it's a $9 billion, I guess $8.9 billion valuation that they just raised money at. And so, the state expects them to put a substantial amount of money forward to do whatever it is that they want to do with their private business, and the state will help where we can on infrastructure and other things that are the job of the state, help educate people who might, work in different jobs that are available from it. But I just want to reiterate, what we won't be is an unending, hole full of money that is, feeding it to a stadium when we have so many other valuable things that the state should be investing in for the people.
Governor, a follow-up to that question.
Yes,
you
sir.
said before that you want the Bears to pay off the loan still outstanding on Soldier Field's renovation before you'd support any state assistance with any infrastructure around a new stadium in Arlington Heights. Have you heard anything from the Bears that would cause you to change that position or get you closer to yes?
As I just said, I'm a yes on assisting a business in growing in the state of Illinois. As far as paying off the debt that it still exists, let me paraphrase and reiterate what I mean, which is we need to make sure that the taxpayers are not burdened by the debt that was put on in the building of the stadium if we're then going to go on and support more funding for anything to do with the next stadium. I also want to add that I would like them to be in the city of Chicago. This is not me demanding anything. Just as personally as a fan of the Bears, I would love it if they would stay in the city of Chicago. Having said that, if they choose their private business, if they choose to go somewhere else in the state of Illinois, like Arlington Heights, that's their choice. I would personally discourage it, but as a public official anyway, I'll support them in the way that I think businesses deserve to be supported when they're creating jobs and growing our economy.
Governor, one more thing, I guess. So you may not have seen this yet, but Jane Goodall just died at age 91. But a big supporter, my understanding is of Lincoln Park Zoo. Just any thoughts?
Of what? Sorry, I didn't want you to hear what you said. Yeah.
Jane Goodall died? Yeah. She's been a big supporter of Lincoln Park Zoo.
Yes.
Just any thoughts on her and her legacy?
I mean, I literally am just hearing this, but I will say, look, I think of her as a scientist and explorer, somebody who has cared deeply about the environment, so I know what a loss it is. I have to say, she has lived a very full life, and so I always think about somebody who's done so much in their lifetime and lived a reasonably long time, and I think on the one hand, we ought to be mourning our loss of them in this world and also celebrating their lives, because she has inspired so many other people to go into the field she was in, but also just as a very, very successful person, successful woman, and in her lifetime overcoming a lot of barriers that women had in front of them many years ago and still have in front of them.
Again, we spent a considerable time listening to Governor J.B. Pritzker at UIC's College of Medicine addressing medical misinformation coming from the Trump administration. I do want to point out some of the things that he talked about outside of that scope. He talked about the government shutdown, saying that Donald Trump doesn't want to sit down with Democrats. He also spoke about the National Guard potentially coming to Chicago. He said crime is down. He said that there's been no update on when the Guard will come, if they are still coming, just saying that there was a memo that was put out in reference to that. And if you are living in and around Chicago or even in our state, of course, you have your eyes on the Bears. Possibly, it sounds like they want to move to Arlington Heights, but you heard the governor there saying that he would discourage that he wants to see this team stay in Chicago. And you'll remember it was last month where the governor said that the Bears must pay Soldier Field debt before the legislator would even consider a property tax break. He addressed that. And he also said that he doesn't believe that the state should be an unending hole of money for the Bears to resurrect a stadium, for them to build a new stadium. Said that the state should help where they can in terms of infrastructure, but not just pour money into this new stadium, but definitely said that he does not encourage the Bears to make that move to Arlington Heights. Of course, Chicago Live will continue. Stay with us. We'll have much more right after this break. Welcome back to Chicago Live. We want to talk about something that is really important, especially when it comes to your health. We know that 4 people are dead and nearly 24 were hospitalized. This is all because of a listeria outbreak connected to recalled ready-to-eat products sold nationwide at several different stores. And we know there was 1 death in our state. And here to talk to us about this is Dr. Stephen Jumic from Northwestern Medicine. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Let's start with this. What is listeria and how are people infected?
So listeria is a type of bacteria. It's mostly found in the soil, and people tend to get infected because they consume foods that have been into contact with the bacteria. So you imagine things like produce that's in the soil, but also it can get into foods that we eat that come from animals as well. So mostly people get it from foods they eat, particularly when we hear of outbreaks. We hear of things coming from things like dairy or processed meats, but it's mostly from prepackaged foods or kind of ready-to-eat foods as well.
Follow-up question to that. Is there any way to detect this? If you're about to eat that already ready-made sandwich or something like that, is there a way to identify that, oh, this may be contaminated?
So by just looking at the food itself, unfortunately, no. You would probably use kind of your best judgment like you would with eating any other food. If it looks spoiled or looks old, that would be a reason to avoid it, but nothing specifically, just by looking at the food, would make you think listeria might be in here.
When it comes to listeria, is this a situation where it would potentially die if you warm up the food, if you put it in the microwave?
Absolutely. So there are a lot of precautions that people could take in order to prevent getting an infection from listeria and any other or most other foodborne illnesses as well. So like you mentioned, preparing your food. So the things to make sure of is if you're eating meat, that you're heating it up till it's cooked all the way through. So this includes like your steak, your chicken, but things like hot dogs as well too. But particularly the types of foods we hear about it most often are, like I said, these frozen foods, but also things like lunch meats and dairy products as well, if they come from raw milk or unpasteurized milk. So yes, cooking thoroughly and avoiding raw dairy products can help you avoid getting this type of infection.
If a person actually has listeria, is there any identifying factor in terms of symptoms that vary from listeria versus feeling like you have food poisoning?
So listeria specifically, if you're having a mild case of it, a mild infection, you might just have diarrhea. But symptoms to be on the lookout for that are much more unique to listeria compared to other types of food poisoning is if you're starting to get fevers or headaches, neck stiffness, because listeria is a unique foodborne infection that can actually cross into the brain and cause brain infections, which are, as you can imagine, much more life-threatening than a mild case of diarrhea.
How long does it take for these symptoms to show up? You eat a sandwich, you eat something that's infected, contaminated. Are we talking a few hours? Are we talking within minutes? You know something is wrong.
Mm-hmm. So it's usually a few days, actually, before people start feeling symptoms. If someone's, and those tend to be the mild symptoms, like I said, abdominal discomfort or diarrhea. If someone is going to end up having a severe case of listeria infection, which includes the bacteria going into the person's blood, or like I mentioned, a brain infection, it could take up to 11 days for that symptom to actually, the more severe infection symptoms to actually present themselves. So if you are consuming or eating something and you feel crummy and ill within a few hours of consumption, I would say it's much less likely listeria and much more likely some other type of foodborne infection.
Dr. Jumic, someone has listeria. How do you treat them? Mm-hmm. What is the treatment for this?
Yes. So thankfully, what I'll say is the vast majority of people don't need any treatment. Their body will fight it off. If someone is ill enough that they're not staying hydrated because of their amount of their diarrhea, or if they're getting these symptoms I mentioned, like headache and neck stiffness, and they need to be in a hospital, antibiotics can be given in both of those circumstances. And an even lower threshold I would have for treating is someone who is pregnant, because pregnancy, in addition to other conditions that make people more susceptible to infections, carries another risk in that this bacteria can actually cross the placenta and affect the fetus and potentially lead to premature birth or loss of the pregnancy. So, yes, it can be treated, but these particular groups of people, like those who are pregnant, those who are immunocompromised, those over the age of 65, should, if they know they've been in contact or they've consumed food that has been recalled for listeria, should reach out to their primary care provider to see if they do need to be started on antibiotics.
All right, Dr. Stephen Jumic with Northwestern Medicine, thank you so much for lending your expertise here on Chicago Live. We appreciate you.
No problem. You have a good day. Thanks for your time.
All right, you do the same. I do want to just point out to people that are listening in or watching us right now that these ready-to-eat products were sold nationwide at Walmart, Trader Joe's, Kroger, and Albertson stores. This is all coming from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, just so you know that out there. The Food and Drug Administration initially reported a recall involving prepared pasta meals. That was on Thursday, September 25th. And as of right now, again, 4 people are dead and nearly 24 had to be sent to the hospital. So just double check what you purchased. Look this up online. I won't get into the specifics of every single meal that has been recalled, but you can definitely find this online by just searching listeria and recalls for sure. We are going to move into our 2 o'clock hour. Brian Jackson is going to take over. It has been a pleasure being with you here for this hour of Chicago Live. We'll be right back after this break.
Welcome to the 2 o'clock hour here on Chicago Live. Brian Jackson here with you. We are going to start this 2 o'clock hour talking about a nonprofit called We Ride Together. They're working to shine a light on some of the widespread issues of sexual abuse when it comes to youth and amateur sports. Their mission is to make sports the safest place for children and young adults by raising awareness. We're joined now by the founder and president of We Ride Together, Carrie Caring. Thanks so much for being here.
Hi. I'm so excited to be here.
All right.
Oh,
so
dear.
I want to know, Carrie, what inspired the creation of We Ride Together?
Well, about 5 years ago, it came to light that our daughter, who was junior in high school at the time, and a minor had been groomed and sexually abused by her coach. And when we were dealing with the after effects of putting together what had happened, trying to understand grooming, the shock our family was going through, what we were going to have to navigate going forward as our daughter was a victim, and how to get her all the help she needed. I couldn't find the necessary resources out there. And so I created We Ride Together to develop prevention education, reduce the stigma around discussing the issue, because if you can't talk about something, you can't fix it, and then create a roadmap for victims and survivors coming forward and through the situations.
Since this happened to your daughter, obviously this is a very personal issue for you. Going back in time, were there any warning signs to let you know as a parent that this was happening to your daughter?
Well, I think that's what's so interesting, right? Because since I've started We Ride Together, I've talked to hundreds, if not thousands, of parents. And, the one question is, what are the big red flags, right? What big red flags can we look for? And what I can say is the big red flags are really, really hard to spot, because in situations like grooming, it is typically somebody that you, your family, your child knows well and trusts. And so we can talk about the flags all day, but again, they're nearly impossible to spot when you're in the situations, which is why we have to put in prevention mechanisms.
How big of a problem would you say that sexual abuse is in the youth and amateur sports right now in 2025?
Well, currently, 50% of all athletes say they have experienced abuse in their sport, whether it's physical, emotional, or sexual. And the first incidence of that abuse, the average age is 13 to 15. So when you look at just the cold hard numbers, it's a very big problem. It's a hugely endemic issue.
Over the years, why do you think that this issue has maybe been overlooked or silenced for so long?
Because there's so much stigma and there's so much taboo, and it is such a traumatic thing that happens for just a grossly upsetting situation that everybody wants to look away, and nobody wants to say, right, like when you look at leaderships and sporting organizations, federations, NGOs, nobody wants their sport to be associated with this topic, right? So everybody tends to shy away as opposed to addressing it head on.
So you mentioned that education and awareness are part of the mission of this organization. What does that actually look like in practice?
Well, the easiest thing is rule of three, right? When you are, when you have a child playing on any team, or a young adult playing on any team, right? Always have three in the room, meaning it can be two children, one coach, one trainer, or, two adults, one child, right? And it doesn't mean that you can't have private conversations with the kids you're coaching. What it means is those conversations have to be observable and interruptible. On text chains, include a parent, include another adult, right? Keep everything observable and interruptible. Keep the boundaries in place.
What would you say, are there maybe certain sports or levels of play where this is more prevalent than others from what you've been finding?
Well, first of all, I would say across the board in sports. It is happening in all sports across the board. In individual sports, high performance sports, you have somewhat higher prevalences of that just because of the intense nature and the consistent one-on-one interactions and the closeness of being in those sports, right? Because in your sport, it becomes your family, right? It's the closest thing for most people to their, for children other than their family if they're involved in sports. But the incidences do rise in individual and high performance. But nobody's exempt from it. It's across the board in sports, we're seeing it.
I guess looking forward in the months and years down the line, what is your long-term vision for We Ride Together, and what does that change look like for you and the others at your organization?
Well, we'd love to end abuse in sports, right? And I think some of that comes with a cultural shift of again, understanding what power imbalances look like, right? Having all of the things that we put in place in corporate America and in schools as to how to keep these places safe from power imbalances, safe from these things, right? Normalizing those in our sporting communities.
All right, Carrie Caring, from the CEO and founder of We Ride Together. Thanks so much for what you're doing to make youth sports a much safer place for everybody. Thanks again.
Thank you so much.
All right, time is now 2:11. We're going to take a short break here on Chicago Live, and we'll be right back. All right, time is now 2:15 here on Chicago Live. We are rejoined by who's now become a friend of the show from Harvard University, Professor Avi Loeb. Thanks so much for joining us once again.
Thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure.
We talked to you maybe about this time a week ago. What is new in terms of some of the objects that have been found in space, and new something that's been created from the United Nations? What update do we have from there? Since the last time we spoke to you about a week ago, now we got some new information coming in from the United Nations are weighing in on what we're finding in space as well.
Right. So let me start with the physical properties of this interstellar object, a visitor from outside the solar system. We know that it's losing about 150 kilograms per second based on data from the Webb telescope. And it's losing it mostly in the direction of the sun. And from that, we can figure out that there must be a push away from the sun on this object. There is a force. But I analyzed the data from 4,000 observations of 3I Atlas over the past 4.5 months. So all of the data from 227 observatories on Earth shows no deviation from a trajectory shaped by gravity alone. And that means that despite the push on the object, it must be extremely massive to resist it. It doesn't care about it. And so I obtained a minimum mass of 33 billion tons, for this object, which is at least 1,000 times more than the previous interstellar comet that we saw back in 2019. So the question arises as to how come this is such a giant object comparable to Manhattan Island when the previous one, was so much smaller. The previous one was the size of a football field. This one is the size of Manhattan Island. It's quite a difference. And you would expect many more of the small ones before you see a big one like that. So that's a puzzling fact. Also, today there was a report about nickel coming out of this object without much iron. And again, that is a very unusual property of it. And also we know that the object came along a path that is aligned with the plane of the planets around the sun. And that's highly unusual because the chance for that happening at random is 1 in 500. In addition, just a few days ago, I realized that back on August 15th, 1977, there was a very famous flare in the radio signal that was given the name the wow signal because the observers that recorded it at the Ohio State University was stunned at how powerful this signal was. And wrote wow in the document that records that signal, and so it's called the wow signal from 1977. And I checked it. Turns out that it came from about the same direction in the sky as 3I Atlas, within 9 degrees. And the chance for a random alignment of the two directions of 9 degrees or so is 0.6%. So the question arises whether this wow signal from 1977 was transmitted by 3I Atlas. We don't know, and there was no report on radio observations of 3I Atlas so far. So I'm encouraging radio astronomers around the world to check out whether there is any radio transmission from 3I Atlas. I calculated that back in 1977, the object was 600 times farther from us than the sun is. And that was a large distance. And presumably, if it had transmitted that signal, it had quite a powerful transmitter, about a gigawatt, according to my calculations, which is comparable to the power output of a nuclear reactor that we have on Earth. So all of these are interesting tidbits that came along across the past week or so. But in addition, yesterday, I decided to submit a white paper to the United Nations, basically calling for the creation of a committee that will analyze what we know about interstellar objects that come into the solar system from outside, similar to 3I Atlas, that look anomalous. Because we have to be prepared for a black swan event, an event with a small probability that could change everything for us. And it's really important to be prepared for that. And currently, there is no international organization. Obviously, alien technology would be a threat to all humans on Earth. It wouldn't care how we split the land on this rock that we call our home, the Earth. And so it's an international matter, and we need to be organized in that fashion. And I'm suggesting, given that the Rubin Observatory in Chile will find a new interstellar object every few months in the coming decade, that we attend to each of those through a committee that would look at all the data, use all the assets we have to evaluate the risk or the threat, how anomalous the object is, and then decide about how to respond to it if it looks suspicious.
When you say respond, that's the key word there. If this ends up being a threat, what does that look like for us? How do we respond, and who leads that effort?
Well, that's an excellent question, because just think about ants that are sitting in the crack of a pavement and they see a biker passing by. The ants would have no way of doing anything about the biker because they just don't have the ability to cope with the biker, and they don't have the means to communicate with the biker. And so we might be in a similar situation where we have no way of affecting the actions of alien technology that comes to visit us because it's far more advanced than any technologies that we possess. But we should be aware of that. As of now, we learned the lesson from the dinosaurs that were killed 66 million years ago by a giant rock the size of Manhattan Island, roughly the size of 3i Atlas, that hit the Earth. So we are preparing for that. We are saying, let's monitor the sky for any rocks that are flying by, and then we can deflect them. But that assumes that, it's a rock. Nobody imagines a situation where it might be alien technology, and that's something that we must entertain, given that we launched spacecraft that will exit the solar system, like Voyager, for example, and we just did it over the past 50 years. Imagine if we had continued research and development in science and technology over a period of 1,000 years instead of 100 years, or over a period of 1,000,000 years. And that's some benefit that another civilization might have relative to us.
Obviously, as a scientist, this is right up your wheelhouse, and you're calling on policymakers to do more as well. Why should the average American, or here in Chicagoan watching at home, why should they follow this?
Right. So, you could decide to not to lose any sleep on that. And that is if you prefer to believe that anything in the sky is a rock. Okay, so including objects that come into our vicinity, close to our home. And the situation is similar to, suppose you look through the window and you see an animal coming into your backyard. The most likely situation is that it's a street cat. Now, if you see that the animal has a tail that is not coming out of its rear end, but it's coming from its forehead, and you realize that the animal is 1,000 times more massive than the previous street cat that came into your backyard, wouldn't you be alert to that animal? Because, it also comes close to various assets that you have in your backyard. You would be worried that it may come through the front door. You may lose some sleep. However, if you want to ignore it and just say, everything that comes into my backyard must be a street cat, you can live in peace. Of course, ignorance about the environment is self-promoted. We can decide not to care about it. We can insist that everything in the sky is comets. But that will not change the nature of objects that come to our backyard. If we have a neighbor, some intelligent civilization that happens to be not far from us, the fact that we ignore it would not change its existence. Having a neighbor has nothing to do with the opinions that we hold. It just for the same reason that the Earth was moving around the sun for 4.5 billion years before the Vatican insisted that it's moving around, that the sun moves around the Earth, and the Earth continued to move around the sun irrespective of what the Vatican said. And so for the same reason, whether we have a neighbor, whether we are being visited by alien technology, these facts would not depend on what we say about them. We can ignore them and sleep well, that's fine. But I'm suggesting that we should be aware of that possibility because we launch technological gadgets out of the solar system.
All right, Professor Loeb. Well, hopefully, if we do have some neighbors, hopefully they're the friendly kind for sure. Thanks so much for your time this afternoon.
Thanks for having me. And by the way, by the end of this week, we should have a very good photograph of 3i Atlas with a pixel resolution of 30 kilometers from the Mars orbiters. And stay tuned. Let's see what we see in that image.
One big rock. You say it's about the size of Manhattan Island. We will definitely be keeping an eye on, and once we get those resolutions, I'm sure we'll have you back on the show. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me.
All right, time is now 2:26 here on Chicago Live, this Wednesday edition. We'll be right back after a short break. Welcome back to Chicago Live. If you drive along the Kennedy, we finally got some good news for you. We are getting some reports that the Illinois Department of Transportation says that the $169 million Kennedy Expressway rehab project is finally entering its final stretch. With much more on when all the main lanes will reopen. We're joined now by Jonathan Shoemaker, the Bureau Chief of Construction for Illinois Department of Transportation, also known as IDOT. Thanks so much for your time.
No problem. Thanks for having me on.
A lot of people have been frustrated driving on the Kennedy for the last few years. Just how significant is it that IDOT is not only reopening the Kennedy lanes ahead of the holiday deadline, but they're doing it earlier than expected?
Yeah, this is something we've been working towards all year. When we went out there in middle of March and put up the most recent round of lane closures, we were aware of how much of an impact it is to the motoring public, and something we challenged our contractor and our consultants, our engineers out there, to try to get the project done as quickly as possible. So it was a large team effort, a lot of late nights and long days, and just putting forth that effort to get the project done as quickly as possible. Being able to remove the mainline lane closures roughly 2 months before our targeted deadline of Thanksgiving is quite the accomplishment, and kudos to the team to getting this done.
Now that this is, I guess, like you said, ahead of deadline, how exactly would drivers be impacted this week as some of those lanes and ramps start to reopen in different phases? Can you walk us through what do those phases look like?
Yeah, so starting Monday night, we removed about a mile of lane closures Monday night and last night. And then going forward tonight and tomorrow night, we're going to do a similar amount of lane closure removal. So tonight, everything from Diversity up to Damon is going to be removed. And then tomorrow night, it's going to be from North Avenue up to Damon. So there's going to be, for each night, there's a little bit more and more of the closure that's removed. It's just too large of a work zone to do all at one time. So very similar to how we broke it up over multiple nights. When we implemented the lane closure, we're doing a similar procedure to remove the lane closures as well. Friday night, we do not do any staging work. It's just too dangerous for the workers out there on a Friday night. So Saturday night will be the final night, and they'll go from Hubbard's Cave up to North Avenue, and that'll be the final removal by Sunday morning.
And once this is all done, just how much of a difference is the everyday driver going to experience as far as their commute?
So that's the big advantage is having 4 lanes open in each direction with the addition of the reversible lanes. So it's going to be back to that standard commute. It's been a while. Obviously, it's a 3-year project, and we did have a couple months over the winter where everything was open. So yeah, it'll be back to that normal commute for the motoring public coming into the city in the morning and going back home in the afternoon.
The Kennedy last had its most major overhaul back in 1994. What condition was the Kennedy in before this most recent update?
So it's kind of hard to remember now that the bridge decks are so much smoother, but there was quite a few potholes throughout the bridge deck. That was the major focus of this rehabilitation, was to remove the existing wearing surface on the bridges, and get down to good sound concrete, and then we put on new latex concrete overlays. Not only is it a much smoother wearing surface, it's much more durable, and the latex itself acts as a waterproofer, which is going to extend the life of the bridges overall. We also took the advantage of having, because the lanes were closed for the bridges, of doing a lot of pavement patching as well. So those emergency patching operations that would pop up a couple times throughout the year should be much more minimal, just because of the amount of patching and rehabilitation we've been able to complete over the last 3 years.
Since the last major overhaul, I guess, how has updates in technology helped make this process not only go smoother, quite literally on the roads, but also faster?
Yeah, the biggest advantage with the technology as far as road construction goes is our ability to message to the motoring public. We called it our Intelligent Transportation System, or ITS. You might hear that term thrown out there. We're able to do a lot of work with cameras and sensors out there that provide real-time updates to the motoring public as far as what travel times through the work zone are, travel times to specific destinations, and if there's any changed conditions ahead, if there's a shoulder breakdown, or if there's a lane closure for the night. So being able to convey that information just keeps the work zone as safe as possible, keeps the workers safe, keeps the motoring public safe.
And looking ahead now, are there any more major expressway rehab projects on the horizon for Chicago drivers? And part two of that question, is there anything that you could learn from the work on the Kennedy that would help improve the outcome for future projects?
I'm sure we'll take some of the lessons we've learned here. I'd like to think that each year we were out on the Kennedy, it got a little bit better, just because you do learn what works, what doesn't work, different tools that we have to try to accomplish tasks in a more timely manner. As far as the next corridor that's going to be worked on, we're going to be working on the Bishop Ford starting in the springtime. There's a chance we'll get out there and do some patching in the weekends this fall. But the major rehabilitation on the Bishop Ford is going to start in spring of 2026.
All right. We're looking forward to those updates for sure. Jonathan Schumacher from the Bureau Chief of Construction for IDOT. Thanks so much for your time, and thank you and all of your entire team for finally getting that work done on the Kennedy. I know a lot of drivers watching this are going to enjoy that good news and a much smoother commute to and from the office. Thanks again for your time.
Thank you very much.
All right, we're going to take a short break here on Chicago Live, and we'll be right back. back with a live look at the big board for the New York Stock Exchange. Looks like stocks are trading up just over 98 points so far on this Wednesday. Of course, this comes just hours after the government shut down in our nation's capital. We're going to go live to the Senate as the debate continues.
Finance Committee is charged with looking at this issue and discussing it. That's why we fought so hard in the Affordable Care Act for something called the Basic Health Program, which covered people under the 200% of the federal poverty line and provided more important health insurance. But right now, we need to act. We need to say to families who are going to be threatened by this that we can work together and we have a plan. And our plan is going to be able to be implemented immediately. Immediately. What is more important than having millions of Americans lose their health insurance and then basically say, we don't really care about this when we already are teetering on so much inflation, so much affordability issues, so much of people struggling. And if people think we really recovered from a post-COVID era, we haven't. People are still struggling with the aftermath and the effects of that. And now we're basically saying we're going to add to your insurance. So, as I did a few days ago here on the Senate floor, I came and talked about how states are now putting these numbers out, a lot of states. When I found this out this summer, I did many events across the state of Washington trying to bring awareness to the public about this. And I found out that some states were really trying to hide the ball. Like they literally didn't want to tell people these costs were going up. Maybe they thought they were going to wait until after the enrollment period opened where there was nothing you can do much past that. But these states are seeing astronomical costs for health insurance. The state of Texas, a 39% increase. Arizona, a 48.95% increase. So somehow these numbers were not available to the broader public, and we published a report last week making sure that the biggest insurers in that state, and we were projecting what the state's insurance commissioner or other groups and organizations were saying that this increase is. And now the Kaiser Foundation is putting an even brighter light on what those numbers are, saying that probably that most people will just see an actual doubling of their premiums. So how can it be okay to, and even if you thought, well, you know, okay, 5 million Americans, they're just going to be shortchanged, no problem. It's not that. It's when those people don't have health insurance, it affects the whole system. It takes that progress we made in uncompensated care, driving it down from 16 or so percent, 15 to 16%, down to 7%, and it means that you are not raising the costs on the entire system by seeing a bunch of people with uncompensated care. We did this to cover citizens because it was the smart thing to do. And my colleagues should just come to the table and say, we agree, we need to fix this now. We agree that an open enrollment period that starts as early as October 15th in one or two states and starts for everybody November 15th is on us now. And if we don't send the right signal, this is the catastrophe that's going to happen for people, and that we really do care about affordable health insurance. At a time when we already have increases in, as I said, a lot of household items, now is not the time to put health care on the list and crush families with this extra burden. Let's sit down and get this done. I thank the President, and I yield the floor.
All right, you've been watching some of the debate happening on Capitol Hill as the federal government shut down as of 11 p.m. Central Time last night. We'll continue to keep an eye on that. We'll be right back here on Chicago Live. Welcome back. Time now 2:45. Live look outside at the Bean. I feel like we've had kind of in and out sunshine today. During the noon show, felt like it was kind of cloudy out there, a little overcast, but looking at that shot, it was a lot of sun out there.
But it's kind of a nice change,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it's been, we don't want to complain about the sunshine, but it has been so sunny. We've had the same repetitive weather pattern every single day here for the last, gosh, close to a week and a half now.
I was going to say, it feels like even longer than that.
I know. So I feel like the clouds were just kind of a welcome sight today. But yes, we're kind of in and out of that cloud cover. It's not entirely cloudy out there today, but it has been enough to kind of hold down those temperatures. So it's actually feeling a little more comfortable today. Not quite fall-like, but you know, we're at least getting a little bit closer to that. So on October 1st, which of course is today, the average high temperature now sits at 69 degrees, and we're looking at highs in the mid to upper 70s today, so we're still above average. But the last couple of days, we were actually in the upper 80s to near 90 degrees in some of the suburbs. So today was, you know, much more comfortable from a fall-like standpoint here. 78 degrees is your high temperature this afternoon. And then tomorrow we're going to see decreasing cloud cover. I do expect to start off the day with some cloud cover, and then we'll become sunny through the day. But then Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I mean, it's full-on summertime around here, mid to upper 80s. Suburbs very easily, Brian, tagging 90 degrees, but we have a lot of the, I know.
It's October.
I know, it's certainly, it's not unheard of, but it's definitely not common because again, we're gonna be running about 20 degrees above average going into this weekend. And as we know, a lot of the beaches, the pools, they've been closed since Labor Day.
Yeah.
And we could use some water nearby this weekend.
Reopen for a day or two. Because we're seeing these warmer temperatures now, does this play any impact on what we will see way down the line in the wintertime?
So in the wintertime, that's still quite a ways off, but what we can look at is there's some overall trends that we can kind of lean on. So the Climate Prediction Center did just issue their seasonal outlook that's going to take us all the way into December, and that's looking like we're going to remain on average warmer than normal for the months of October, November, and then possibly into December as well. So we can kind of lean on that, but with that said, we're still going to have those cold snaps. We're still going to have, you know, those weeks that are cooler than average. But the overall trend is looking like we could be ending up warmer than normal.
A little warmer than normal. And one thing I was looking in that 7-day, still not seeing a whole lot of rain.
No, not at all. So unfortunately, those drought conditions, they're expected to get a little bit worse. So currently, most of Chicagoland is considered to be abnormally dry. We do have a pocket of moderate drought across the north and northwest suburbs, ranging from places in southeastern McHenry County through most of Lake County, northwestern Cook County, DuPage, as well as northern Kane County. But I do expect that data comes out every Thursday morning. So I think tomorrow morning when we see the update, unfortunately, I don't think it's going to be one that we want to see. Those drought-like conditions likely are going to get a little bit worse. Wouldn't be surprised if we have more areas of moderate drought popping back up again.
Are those at all related, the warm temperatures we're seeing and the lack of rain?
It's definitely, it goes hand in hand when it comes to the drought status, right? Because the warmer your temperatures are, you're going to have more evaporation from the soil and like what moisture is in that soil. But unfortunately, we've just been kind of stuck in this blocking weather pattern for a while where we've had high pressure overhead. When you have high pressure, you have sinking air, which means not a lot of cloud cover. Without clouds, you can't have rain.
All right.
Yeah.
Up next, we are going to bring in Steve Bender from Fox Weather. We've got dueling hurricanes out there for this Atlantic storm season. Thanks so much for your time, Steve.
Yeah, definitely. Hey, thanks for having me, Brian. And actually, what you guys were just talking about, that dominating high pressure over there in Chicago and the Great Lakes, is a big factor in all of this. This sat over the Ohio Valley region. It was a steering mechanism that pushed Imelda out to sea. That's a component. You said this is dueling storms that are dancing right now in the Atlantic. Umberto was the other storm. And now we know Umberto's gone post-tropical. We'll dive into this. I want to show you some of the impacts because this was historical in nature when you talk about how close they were together in the satellite era. Two storms have never been this close together at hurricane status, 470 miles. But what does that translate to us at home? Look at the Outer Banks. If you haven't heard this story, it's incredible. I encourage you to jump over on Fox Weather. Look at some of the visuals. We've highlighted some of the homes. There's 6 of them that have actually fallen into the ocean because of the surf. The wind, by the way, has only been 30 to 40 miles per hour, but it's been an onshore flow that has been relentless for days now. And so what we have seen is there's the 2009 coastline where you have about 100 yards of beach in front of you, and now the ocean is in these neighborhoods, and it's taking some of those homes out into the surf. We have some visuals showing you that the reason why there's an onshore flow, Brian, is because of what we're seeing out in the western Atlantic. Right now, we have just Imelda. It's a Cat 2 storm barreling towards Bermuda, expecting some big impacts tonight into early tomorrow on Thursday. But we had Umberto. You see that white highlighted color just north of Bermuda? That's actually Umberto. It went post-tropical. It's no longer got tropical characteristics. We will have something interesting that forms actually out in the UK from that. We'll have that at the very end if you want to see that. But the coastal flooding still emerges because of the close proximity of Imelda. Even at a Cat 2 status, onshore flow continues. Outer Banks hangs out a little bit further out into the Atlantic. That's why they have that coastal flood advisory that goes all the way through tomorrow. High surf warning is going to be in place as well. Looking at this, there's the wind speed. Again, if you looked at just that number in and of itself, it probably wouldn't be that impressive, especially when you're talking about tropical systems. All right, oftentimes we're waiting for landfall, and then we're worried about, okay, could we get a significant gust that's north of 75 miles an hour? Are we talking triple digits? But this is a different type of threat. This is a threat that just doesn't leave. And so through multiple high tide cycles, you're having the waves continue to slam against the shore. And so what we always talk about is water wins. And we've seen it sadly play out. By the way, those homes that collapsed, we saw 5 of them collapse in Buxton yesterday afternoon in only 45 minutes alone. So this isn't something that took a long time. The coastal erosion did, but for them to actually collapse, and these are significant homes, 2-3-story homes up on stilts that were falling down. Looking at this in the overall life cycle of this, as it moves through Bermuda, that's going to fall apart. So I know I've hit you with a lot of stuff. I don't know if there's any more questions, but when you look at this, Brian, what's fascinating is Umberto, which I didn't get to tell you much about, that went post-tropical. But actually out of the UK, their Met Office just highlighted it as their first storm of the season. The remnants of that is going to turn into Storm Amy, impacting Dublin and it looks like Ireland by tomorrow into Saturday. So really interesting to see how all of this is integrated, intertwined as the Atlantic continues to stay active late in the season.
Yeah, that's definitely very interesting, Steve. Something else that I wanted to talk to you a little bit about is we've had 3 hurricanes so far in the Atlantic Basin. We've had 2 of which have been Category 5s, 1 a Category 4. And you know, a lot of people, a lot of the talk is, okay, well, the season hasn't felt like it's been too busy, but we're just still getting started, right? Like, we have several more months to get through.
Yeah, the hurricane season goes all the way through November, right? And so October is one of those intense months. We learned from last year, Helene and Milton, back-to-back storms, catastrophic for what happened in 2024, especially for the Southeast. Those were October storms. But to your point, you think about the storms that we've have had. The ingredients have been in place when you think about the sea surface temperatures, and whenever it finds one favorable spot, they can go through rapid intensification. For everybody at home, what does that even mean? That means that their sustained winds increases 35 miles per hour or greater in just a 24-hour time frame. But forget that. Aaron, Gabrielle, they went through ERI along with Umberto. That's extreme rapid intensification. And you start looking at how quickly these formed into that major status. When we look back on this season, if it just ends right now, right, we don't even get any landfalls, this will be historical in so many regards and something that we will look back at meteorologically that was impressive. And thankfully, none of these actually made a U.S. landfall. But it just shows you that in the month of October, more often, we're no longer looking deep out into the Atlantic for those storms to form, but closer back to home. So what I mean by that is like the Caribbean out towards the Gulf or even the Western Atlantic. A lot of these spin up off of frontal boundaries, and the ingredients are in place. The Gulf of America has been untapped. The temperatures inside the water there in many locations are in the lower 90s still. And so even though we have fall frontal boundaries that are coming through, it's cooling off the land. It's not cooling off the water. And why late season storms are still possible and they can still be impactful, I think that's really what Umberto and Imelda just taught us, that even on this late run in a designated quiet season, you're still going to see some of that activity. Overall, though, what we are looking at is a quiet stretch after this. For a brief time frame, we are looking into the southern Gulf. If you guys are familiar with that, it's the Bay of Campeche. It's looking down towards the Yucatan, southern Mexico. They could have a low and it's moving in that direction, moving further south. So we should have a quiet period for about a week, and then we'll start looking at more activity into October. But yeah, overall, it has been. I mean, if you're going to measure it by what CSU, a lot of what we were looking at early on the season by the numbers hasn't been as frequent or as active as what we thought initially. But the storms that have produced have been, impressive in all regards.
Steve, I know that you guys do a lot of predictions at the beginning of hurricane season. I guess, how do those predictions from the beginning of the season compare to now, where we're not quite at the midway point so far?
Yeah, we're past the midway point. CSU, that's Colorado State University, they're the ones that are really on the leading edge of this with the National Hurricane Center all intertwined. They put out their outlooks, and they ended their outlooks. Once you get into the season, they do it all the way through August, and then that's their last one. So where we stand as of right now is, climatologically speaking, what have we seen over the last 75 years? What's the history on it? And why I was talking about that shift from the Atlantic and the MDR. It's known as the main development region. Think about the equatorial Atlantic, right? In between Africa and the Caribbean, that's that spot where you typically see the biggest storms of the year. Well, we're shifting out of that and now moving closer to home because of what all these years of data have showed us. So what we're looking at, though, is the opportunity for some more rising air in the Gulf. We haven't seen that. We could get into some really nitty gritty. It's called the Enzo cycle. You could talk about La Nina and El Nino and that. That didn't come to fruition. We were kind of at a neutral phase. La Nina, by the way, very simplistically put, is just better favorable conditions for powerful hurricanes, because oftentimes you have rising air, and with that, a bunch of humidity and the opportunity for these storms to grow. We didn't have that. If anything, we had a lot of Saharan dust that suppressed any type of development, because these tropical waves were coming off of Africa still, and we had the monsoon season, but the second they left Africa, they still had the Saharan dust embedded, and they could never get organized. And so that was the big component with this, was that none of them could get organized until Aaron. Aaron popped up, finally found a little bit of wiggle room, and then got to a Cat 5 status. So what we're looking at as of right now for all the way through October, and then it runs through November. That's going to be the end of the Atlantic hurricane season. Still plenty of opportunity when we look in the month of October. That's going to be the things that we are looking for, mainly for areas like the Southern Gulf and into the Western Caribbean. That's going to be the spot that we're going to keep our eyes on.
Now, Steve, as we know, you have to have sea surface temperatures around 80 degrees or warmer to be able to maintain these storms and fuel them. So is the sea surface temperatures that we're dealing with throughout the Atlantic and even into the Gulf, as you were mentioning, are they above average, or is this about typically what we see this time of the year?
Oh, no, they're above average. That's a great question. They're above average. But what gets lost in a lot of the messaging is it's not historic at this point, because if you think about off of the last 2 years, 2023 and 2024, they have been at historic levels. They've been at all-time highs. So now that's almost the benchmark in people's mind. And because you're thinking, okay, well, last year it was this bad. It was this hot. And we are just underneath that in both of those areas. And we're going to be pulling that up. Thank you, Jordan. And we're going to show you that here, where you're looking at the sea surface temperatures for the Gulf and the Caribbean. And so they are very warm right now. We haven't had any upwelling. We haven't had any recent storms that would churn it up and actually cool it off at all. But they are at historic levels. But they are still above average. And it's enough that you could easily, sorry, I'm looking at it as we're going to be pulling it up here. It's enough that if you get just a little bit of spin, what we're looking at in Central America is called the CAG. It's called the Central American Gyre. And so as we look at this here, notice those areas that are in red, right? That's where immediately your eye looks at it and it's like, okay, that's warmer. That's above average right now, the temperature departure. Then you start looking back closer to home, Gulf of America, Caribbean Sea, where we've had no action, and you go just south of Cuba, and you start seeing those little red spots. And that's where you're looking at, again, very, very warm temperatures. But irregardless of that, the entire bodies of water are in orange and yellow, which is showing you that departure from normal, which means that it's still conducive. A degree or 2 degrees in the water is significant above average in these areas. So to your point, yeah, that's enough to keep them alive. And by the way, all of that is above 80. We're looking at 85 all the way up to 90-degree water temperature in those spots.
All right, Steve, you've been a wealth of knowledge for us, joining us from Fox Weather. Thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you guys for having me.
All right, that's going to do it for this edition of Chicago Live from Brian and Emily. We'll see you at 4 o'clock. Have a good one.
That they are reveling in this shutdown.
GOP leaders say they're willing to discuss health care issues later in the year and say Democrats should not shut down the government over it.
The party that instigates the government shutdown rarely ends up winning the shutdown fight.
Based on previous shutdowns, the Congressional Budget Office estimates 750,000 federal workers could be furloughed each day. A 2019 law guarantees they'll receive all their back pay when this is over, but the White House says some positions could be cut permanently.
We don't want to lay anybody off, and there's necessarily going to be some pain because Senate Democrats refuse to reopen the government.
Senators will meet for more votes throughout the week and into the weekend until a deal is struck. On Capitol Hill, Rebecca Castor, Fox News.
All right, thank you so much for that, Rebecca. And then on the bottom right portion of your screen, you just saw the kind of time tick into the 16th hour since this went into effect at 12:01, just past midnight, entering a government shutdown, entering the month of October. And of course, the standoff continues, the stalemate continues, and we're hearing from both sides of the aisle. This here on social media from the Republican Main Street Caucus, from the chair, Representative Mike Flood, saying this Democratic government shutdown means our military won't get paid, our veterans will see reduced levels of services, and working Americans will have a tougher time accessing government agencies. Let's be joined right now by the representative, the Republican from Nebraska, Congressman Mike Flood. Thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. And as the saying goes, it feels like we've only just begun. What do we make of this? What's your mindset heading right now into the shutdown?
You know, I wasn't in Congress when this happened the last time. I've been there 3 years. But I remember every time something like this happens and you're on the outside, you're looking at this and you're watching this and you're like, why is this happening? And now that I'm in it, I'm so frustrated because the Democrats have clearly chosen a path to protect themselves from their far left base